again. It is a really packed day with lots of different people coming into M Plus and to share with us what's really about like the future of arts and culture. Maybe I've talked too much today, so that's why now on this panel we have the three speakers joining me to share a little bit more, to think about like in the bigger picture, what is the strategy and what are different stakeholders can really participate in the development of Hong Kong's future arts and culture. So now I would like to pass on the time to my three dear speakers who would like to introduce themselves one by one and tell us a little bit about what they're working at and why they are relevant to the Hong Kong arts and culture space. So maybe I'll start with the lady on the far end,
Sure.
Helen.
Hi, thanks for having me again. I am Helen, so I am actually a policy researcher at our Hong Kong Foundation. So it's a public policy think tank. What I mean by that is, so I look at policy recommendations, I look at policy research, I kind of map out, like what are the loopholes of the current government, and then we do research, we kind of engage with a lot of different stakeholders to come up with policy recommendations fit for the current situation, and then we submit them to the government. So I lead the arts and culture team at our Hong Kong Foundation, and we've actually been looking at several different relevant themes, one of which actually our first report was on museum governance. So obviously super relevant to kind of the up and coming, many different private and public museums in Hong Kong. And then our second report actually covered an equally important theme, which is arts for social inclusion. So, how arts can generate social impact. And obviously we're always thinking about, not like on the one hand, you need to be financially sustainable, but on the other hand, how do you create impact? And so that was our second report. And then most recently, we also looked at up and coming trend, well, not up and coming because it's already a trend, that the convergence and the marriage of arts and technology and what that can do, looking forward. So, and I guess my role in the ecology would be, I see a lot of, ground level or kind of people really working in the industry frontline, so frontline arts and cultural practitioners, and I listen to their stories or like their pain points, generate them into research, kind of grounded research, and I also analyze cultural policies from around the world, and then I also speak with policymakers to hope get a conversation going or resolve some sort of the issues that needs to be addressed. So that's where I come in, and so I'm very honoured to be here with other panelists. So thank you for having me.
So next up,
Richard, please.
Hi, my name is Richard. I actually live mostly in Shanghai, in Hong Kong for the next 1 year or so. Primarily, my work in the last 15 years has been around education, lifelong learning, and knowledge platforms like TEDx. And the other part where I focus on is brands, deep branding, as well as possibly the idea of system change of especially in China, there's a great allowance of new ideas. So how do we find ways of the future of retail, future of brands, future of commercial real estate and cultural design and innovation sector? So really happy with all.
Thanks. First off, thanks Peggy for having me. Thank you for Future City Summit. It's a pleasure to support this fantastic organization for I think 3 or 4 years in a row now. So 2 questions. Number one, who am I? My name is Williamson. I'm the regional editorial director of a brand called Generation T, which is Tatler Asia's platform for the leaders of tomorrow. So we create content and events to build community around future game changers and help to catalyze their impact and support them in any way we can. With regards to why I'm on this panel today, I don't know, you have to ask Andre and the team. I can't really tell my Monet from my Rembrandt, to be honest, but I can certainly comment from the media perspective, from communication, from amplification, and also emerging technologies via GNT. We cover emerging technologies and trends, be they NFTs, metaverse, things like that. Certainly can comment from that perspective as well. But I'm a bit of a, I'm no art expert. Just want to lay that foundation there.
No problem, no problem. Thanks, Lee, Richard, and Helen for joining us today again, because I think it's very important to get this multiple perspectives to understand arts and culture, because it's really open for interpretation, right? Because we need public participation, we need people to come in and appreciate art. So inevitably we need to embrace like different perspectives. So I think here is a great like forum for us to exchange these ideas.
And also because we're at M plus thing.
Yeah.
We're not just talking about visual art or like arts and culture industry. We're talking about and more.
Plus plus plus.
Exactly.
Or M plus W.
W.
Okay. So that's why, because we have like such diverse backgrounds, so that's why I want to ask the very first question, which is like standard question. What is, in your view, a truly influential arts and culture city? So what is your definition of it? And the reason why I'm asking this question is because we know that there will be a new bureau that is being set up in the government that takes care of the cultural policy. And like, in relation to that question, like if we know the definition, how can we come up with like specific KPIs? Like, even though this may not be like the best word for it, but then like indicators that we should work towards to improve the scene in Hong Kong.
Maybe if I go first, like from a policies perspective, actually, obviously there's already been there are existing funding schemes, for example, or different sorts of cultural policies in Hong Kong that support arts and cultural development in Hong Kong now. But so I guess in the future, looking towards, in anticipation of the new bureau, I guess what I would like to see is that that there will be more involvement from kind of public, private, and the mass public towards the involvement and just collaboration with arts and culture, with the arts and culture sector across the city, because I think it's always the balance between kind of supporting the elites, so like the professionals, and democratizing it, which I'm sure Lee would talk about, through technology. It's like you can only do it through technology now. So it's kind of drawing a fine line and like getting a balance between how can you at the same time support professional development of the industry, but at the same time communicate high art or fine artisanship with the mass popular consumer market, for example. I think that's an iterative thing. Like, we don't have a one formula for it. Even the most soft power nations such as South Korea or Japan or the UK, I can see that they don't have a formula either. It's just an organic sort of top down and bottom up kind of combination that makes it work. And I just guess obviously I want the bureau to be here and to drive industry development rather than set frameworks. But I do think having a bureau that is accountable for the culture and creative industries is better than none. So yeah, I have expectations for it.
That's a good thing. Yeah, how about you, Richard?
Thank you. I think I would agree with all that, and I wouldn't add anything to it. The one thing that I would say is around culture. When we talk about art and culture, we really all, I don't know about you, but in my mind, we all go to the same things in our head: sculpture, visual art, performing art, ballet, things like that. But culture is so much more than that, right? It's what we eat, it's the language we speak, it's the way we communicate, it's family, it's traditions. And these are crucial to the development of to the prosperity of any city, of any place. And I think media plays a very important role in that. If people are getting information and are able to kind of feel part of a community with something that is local to them that comes from Hong Kong, that is powerful. Well, and Hong Kong, of course, has always had this nexus of Asia's gateway to the West and its unique relationship with mainland China. A lot of it's kind of culture and media and influences come from both of those sides. I think incredibly important to develop Hong Kong kind of communications culture, and I think the role that we can play in terms of policy is grants or initiatives to support media entrepreneurs to build niche community brands that serve various communities in Hong Kong, whether they be marginalized or whether they be mainstream. I think media has a really important role to play in terms of the building of that culture.
Yeah, by the way, thanks for giving us a little preview of questions. They are great questions, they're very deep. And I mean, I think the question of what is the definition of arts and culture city, I think we start by also asking what is a really strong influential city, right? I think that's foremost. What is the branding of Hong Kong? What is the story of Hong Kong to the world and to Asia? And, on the arts and culture side, I mean, I think a great city. It's really a balance. I think China, we can use the word balance. It's a really important word. I think we're hearing so much about smart city, and very often missing what human city, how city, how humanistic it is, and diversified, radically inclusive, so that everybody is as a good stakeholder. And I think you mentioned about top down, bottom up. I think that balance is also very important. And very often top down, bottom up, also middle. Middle is the corporate. So how does the corporate really participate within the beautiful triangle? And city branding. How do we tell the story of Hong Kong? How do we tell the story of arts and culture's importance in Hong Kong? And heroes. I think a very important part is for young people growing up to understand who are the heroes of the city. You know, I think for a very long point, give you an example, China for a very long time has been the very successful big businessman as heroes. And now within the last 10 years, it is really in some ways balanced. Cultural people have become more forefront. People that are creating things, making things, creating new economy, new system thinking. So that's always, again, looking at the idea of the old conservative school, the old school, and the new school of the city, to have that equally well balanced. So we're ready for tomorrow.
But that we have a mirror, right? There are new heroes. There are new cultural heroes. Got to take care of. I might be hearing about them.
Very great advice. I think like when I'm designing the agenda for today, I really want to include like all the different actors in the cultural value chain, because when we talk about like practitioners in this industry, it's not just the artists. This is like an upstream like phrase because they produce the artwork. And then we have people in the middle who are doing the dissemination, doing the promotion, the curation, etc. And then downstream we have the audience and manage those audience. So like in this full value chain, like what do you think like Hong Kong should be doing to find our own path? The way I put this question is because I don't want to say that we are replicating the South Korean model or the Japanese model. I want to say that like in what ways like can Hong Kong really find our own way, and but at the same time like because I believe like all of you have experience working in other countries or studying other countries example. So is there one example that you think like there are something that we can learn from? And maybe we can adapt it, modify it, and then to become the Hong Kong way of developing our own cultural industry.
I think to come, probably I go back to one of my earlier answers. I think it's the identity of Hong Kong. The identity of Hong Kong is to really narrow down what is a simplified, great story to tell about Hong Kong. What are the keywords? What are the things that really represent Hong Kong? once we have that, how do we find a way to embellish arts, culture, technology? How do we bring it to a different level of livability, of desirable city? So, I mean, I wrote down just kind of a couple of things. I think the few things I very strongly and very supportive, and respectful of Hong Kong's development the last 30, 40 years is there's a department called efficiency. But also at the same time, if you look at a lot of Asian cities, Hong Kong is probably one of the most efficient. And Hong Kong on the side of management, from the education, from global and Asian education-wise, it is probably a great medium negotiator because trust is a very strong foundation of Hong Kong because of the legal system and also the language that Hong Kong has set up that can speak both to China and to the world. So I think these are the things that are really making Hong Kong extremely strong in its position. So you would position that way in Hong Kong because we don't want to position Hong Kong as a shopping city. I think sometimes the branding of cities in Asia has been so much done internally that we sometimes need an outside person to say, you're so good at certain things that you don't even toot your own horn. So I think the idea of that storytelling and self-branding, self-understanding, expression of what you're good at, where you want to bring the citizens, the society towards.
I think one of the worst things you can do if you're trying to accomplish like creating, a culture more defined or more resonance more on a global scale, I think the worst thing to do is like, okay, here are KPIs. We want to basically be South Korea. We want an Oscar-winning film. We want to ban like BTS on the cover of Time magazine. We want our own Squid Game for our Netflix show. Like that's not how culture or how art works, right? Like governments have only a few levers they can really pull to enact change, right? And one of them is education, because the majority of the populace goes through public schools, and the other is taxes and incentives and grants and things like that. And I think so. Really, two things that can be done to kind of develop that. One is tax incentives for various cultural institutions, the institutions, and so on to be in Hong Kong, base operations in Hong Kong. Look at the US, state by state, they're all competing, moving off the lowest taxes like Hollywood studios, because they all want this culture and these jobs and these ideas happening where they are. It's why so much TV and movies are made in the state of Georgia, for example. And the other way is education, making sure that enough money is invested in education. So what we won't see the benefits now, 10, 20, 30 years hence, there will be people with more of an appreciation of art who are thinking about art and culture as much as they're thinking about shopping.
Yeah, and I'd say my take on it actually on this question is actually quite similar to what you both have just said. Like, I think it's definitely super important especially for Hong Kong, to sort of know, going back to the identity kind of issue. It's going back to your question, actually we've looked at a lot of different in my team, for example, we've looked at a lot of different cultural policies around the world. I don't think if we had the answer to your question, we'd all be in the bureau. But I guess it's like an iterative sort of brainstorming. So this is just my kind of perspective. I just think because it's very difficult to answer your question, because Hong Kong innately is a city that's so diverse, and obviously with so many different groups of people with different interests, with different sort of characteristics. They will think what they're good at can be a reflection of what Hong Kong should go for in terms of Hong Kong city branding. And like there are so many opportunities and just different images of city branding for Hong Kong. And because there's no bureau, we don't really have like one direction to be like, okay, let's all be the city of opportunities, let's all be the city of, I don't know, like screen media of the future or whatever. Like because if there's sort of a direction, like a broad enough direction that's kind of commonly agreeable, then everyone would be like, okay, yeah, my work can totally align with this. So I guess, I mean, again, going back to the new bureau, I have high expectations, is what I'm trying to say. And but kind of more concretely, so that's on a macro level. But then, so again, analyzing different policies, and I'm not saying this is the best example that we should, draw from, but because I've been looking at, mainland's cultural documents recently, they do have like sort of kind of focus areas that navigate / direct people to kind of innovate through recognizing, where they come from, for example. So obviously arts and technology is a way for emerging new creative ideas to erupt. So that's one thing. But then another approach is how you can inspire new content through transforming traditional, cultural traditions. And I think that's, the latter is probably something we haven't done in Hong Kong very much, in education, in the education aspect. I mean, we're both sort of products of the Hong Kong education system, and I'd say, we're probably in our schooling probably weren't, exposed to a lot of that. So I guess another way when the government comes to devise new cultural policies for the future, we could, focus on, how can we inspire new content via transforming our traditions, for example. Yeah, this is just a few of my current observations, but yeah, it's definitely not an answer. So it's just something that I'm thinking about.
Thanks, Helen. So we talk about what Hong Kong should do, should not do, or things like that. But what is the division of labor like between the public and private sector? What would you think that is? When we are finding our path, like in agriculture?
New question for you again. Perhaps you right back
I know.
policy.
Okay. I definitely, equal, I actually think. Like, as in, I don't think, I think the ecosystem can only thrive if there's enough public support, so like public sector support. So the government obviously needs to give grants for, practitioners starting out. I think that's, that's essential. But then how they then, develop their IP, their creativity, how they then go into the IP development and IP commercialization stages, you definitely need private sector support. And do we have enough policy to encourage private sector's involvement? I'm not sure. So that's probably something we do need to think about as well. We looked at the Korean government's policies. There's actually 7 times more funding that goes into the commercialization stages of culture and creative industries in South Korea versus Hong Kong. So that's, that discrepancy is quite obvious. So obviously, our policy focus is lacking in the sort of industry thinking sense. So I think, again, that's obviously spot on, like something else that, we need to reshift our emphasis.
I'd like to follow a little bit on, when we had our exchange, actually, we speak about it or think about it. Globally, some of the most interesting arts, culture, development happen in cities that have affordable rent. We know, as New York City as an example, how the Lower East Side was at one point shifted to Brooklyn, because as real estate goes up, art and culture seems so. So how does Hong Kong, wanting to develop art and culture, think about the housing? Some of the most why is Berlin so creative, cultural, and artistic, and even innovative? Berlin is becoming, after Tel Aviv, another Silicon Valley. It's because of affordability. And so that's the real estate part of the conversation of creativity. Yeah. The second part is education. if students, if young people are not given the freedom to, I like to use the word a few times today, maybe, why? You know, Hong Kong trains everybody, why? Businessmen, head of companies, policymakers, government, civil servants, everybody to well-being, why? If students are trained why, when are they ever going to really express their mind? So does creative industry really start at a younger age? Give young people a certain room to be expressive, to be surprising, to be encouraged to be surprising. Don't let everybody follow the high pattern, you know. And you know, I think some of the most interesting cultural scenes in the world are surprising, unexpected, and magical. Is that a part of the education language or creative education language? So I think by the time they're 24, 22, 24, 25, exiting undergraduate or graduate school, is a bit late to be creative. You know, and that's what we do at university. We say is, if we don't let you this freedom, later on when you're in the commercial world, then you will have a harder time to find yourself then.
And earlier on, Richard, you shared a story about Rolex, like about the protege like program. Would you like to talk a little bit more? Because I think it's like a great example of how the private sector participating in this effort.
And the talent thing as well.
Talent.
Yeah. I mean, we mentioned a little bit before the session is what are some interesting case studies that is maybe not the role of the museum, maybe not the role of the government, but it's basically the city coming together and doing a few things. I'll just give one or two or three examples. Sorry to take the time.
No.
South by Southwest is a city project that is decades already building in Austin, Texas. And to the point that Toronto now, a couple of years ago, wants it called by North by Northeast. Portland wants to develop it, continuing, and they call it North by Northwest. But South by Southwest is 5 days, 1 week of festivals. Digital, the entire city participates. It is not a museum project. It is not a gallery. It is not a university. But every citizen, every industry of the city raise up, get up, and to do this. The city closed down, the street closed down. The park is used for music, digital, art, architecture, food, etc., etc. So something like this is a celebration. I mean, you don't after this, you don't even need to brand the city of Austin. It became globally famous because of 5 days festival. And to the point that mayors after mayors use a tagline for the branding of Austin called "Keep It Weird, Austin the City." So again, that's every citizens, every entire city coming together. An art design project that involves city, involves park, involves public spaces. We have an amazing conference called BODW, Business of Design Week, with incredible number of talents from around the world coming. Very often I ask the question, what do they leave when they go home? Besides a great talk. You know, I mean, look at Serpentine Gallery in London, in Hyde Park. They have an event every summer. They choose one architect to do a project for 5 months, to exhibit for 3 months in the Hyde Park in the summertime. And it's a pop-up. It is a celebration of the city. People around the world in this interest in this area will want to visit it. But the coolest part about this, it serves another reason. Every architect that has exhibited in Serpentine, that space, has never practiced it. So it becomes another way to introduce that professional to the city of London. So if you study the history of it, most of the architects within 18 months of the exhibition, you get a commission from the country. So again, the second, third depth level. And the last one is we're thinking about mentorship, right? How does corporate bottom develop something, not necessarily for a million people, 100,000 people, but just change the life of one person at a time. So Rolex Mentors and Protégé program is 20-some years. Every year, 7 mentors is chosen. Each mentor has 1 student for 1 year. They don't have to live together. They visit each other twice a year. They're on calls all the time. But how amazing it is that one person helps one person for 1 year, it changes their entire life forever. So how to create this kind of really humanistic way, not just throw money and say we're going to give a population a certain help, but we know actually who are the people that gets the benefit and what is the trajectory of the change, of the development, of the growth. So I'm hoping something like M+ or organizations like what Hong Kong is building to not necessarily just stand alone, but bring together 100, 200 Hong Kong companies to go on this movement together.
The one thing I quickly add to that, I think what Richard said about the rent is so at the crux of everything. It's the elephant in the room, right? And we went to New York example, you're absolutely right. We moved further and further out, in London, Paris. I used to live in Beijing. And I even saw that in my 5 years there, like, 798, Chigoba, like, was a former industrial area. It was considered to be outskirts of town. It was almost like kind of bucolic, and then as Beijing grew, what became downtown increased, the commercial galleries moved in, the artists will move to the Taochangdi, but they had space to move out to. In Hong Kong, they'd be swimming, if they moved out that far. So I go to Science Park quite a bit. It's celebrating its 20th anniversary next year, and I know that over the last 6 to 12 months, they've been building a lot of accommodation for the people, so they can get the best international talent into the Science Park. And so part of it is because of their location, they're remote, and the other part of it is a lot of people, to get rent in Hong Kong, you need like a 2-year lease, and people are here for like 6 months or a year-long projects and so on. So they're building affordable accommodation for people, the engineers, the technologists, and so on. Let's build one of those for art. Let's build like a Hong Kong art park with like affordable accommodation and ideas and tools and so on. And put it to my own territory. And I think that would go a long way, because if you're thinking about, if you're kind of raised and you're educated and your parents are talking to you about the importance of a roof over your head above all else, there's not much time for aesthetics. And I think if that's taken care of, then other stuff can flourish.
I want to follow up a little bit on that. I've only been back in Hong Kong a couple of months, and I think Hong Kong has something like that, some sort of, in some ways it has become that. But imagine Hong Kong with a couple more some sort of districts. But the government's great help is help the rent, the lease to stay at that price, not that suddenly the opportunity comes, new building comes up, the gentrification of the space. I mean, the greatest example in the world is Christianity in Denmark. That place is free rent, and some of the most creative, the most innovative things of this country comes from Christianity. So how do we have nurture that kind of place? And we bring city people across policymakers and banking people, financial people in Hong Kong to go to Sunset Bowl. And they're amazed. This is part of Hong Kong. So for me, these are prides of Hong Kong that we need to find a way to really tell those stories.
Yeah, I can't believe I found my Beijing friend here because I have personally lived in Beijing for 4 years as well, and I really like the Hutong places.
Yeah.
Like it's really cheap rent, and then the musicians and artists can just find a place there and to do their own thing. So that's great, and I do hope that Hong Kong will have something similar there.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then, yeah, so we talked a lot about the supply side of things. So what about shifting to the other side of the equation, like on the demand side, audience? Like, because for all the nice artworks, like music or cultural pieces, we need like audience, and we need to have like audience that I really appreciate, not just coming for social media, like Instagram posts, but also really understanding a little bit more about like the stories behind the history connected to these artworks and things like that, to then really build, I would say, forming a sustainable culture like in the city. So we talked a bit about education, but probably more on along the lines of pursuing a career in the industry. But how about like on the public education, arts education? How should the government or other stakeholders in the society should approach it so that we will have like a good enough, like a big enough mass audience that would appreciate like all these artworks, so that artists will feel recognized, and then they would also have financial sustainability to maintain their.
Yeah, actually, I actually, obviously, again, from a policy perspective, there's a lot of arts education focused sort of grants that the government are sort of giving out to different sort of arts groups, hoping that they will run projects that will, educate the public on arts education. And like, whilst we do, there are a lot of projects that come in, they apply for this arts education funding. But then obviously you can't just rely on these, like every year, these 10 arts groups, and then they might, increase the audience garnership by like a few thousand. But then this is all scattered efforts. I think it's piecemeal like efforts. You really can't just rely on these like arts education grants. And they are good, but they're just one like little baby step. And I've been in policy for like a couple of years now, and my observation is actually, arts appreciation, it really depends on that person actually, whether they are willing to learn about this particular art. It's actually less effective if you are too hard sell about something. And so again, this goes back, this is not really answering the question because it's huge, but like it again goes back to whether we give them an appropriate environment for them to be like, oh, that's cool. Like, oh, I want to be this KOL, or like, I really like the vibe of this person. Oh, she auctioneers at Christie's or whatever. And oh, that's what, we are all humans in the end. Like you want to do things by association to different, things. And so again, obviously, as you can probably tell, I'm directing the next, conversation to Lee from a media perspective, because I think with the influx of social media and like, popular culture, it's actually a lot easier to influence different things, like be it arts and culture, be it food and beverage, be it, lifestyle, via social media. And I think that's definitely a way more direct and effective approach than, like government being like, come get our, come apply our funding to, with, the KPI is to promote arts education. I think, like, if you're more, from a more subtle approach, it actually achieves, something that's of greater impact. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah, totally. I think in terms of the original question about how do you get people more interested in art, I think you have to meet them halfway.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't just be like, here's a Rembrandt, look at the brushstrokes, look at it, appreciate it. Because they've had access to that as long as they've been around, alive, and they don't care about the brushstrokes.
Yeah.
So, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's okay. I think we need to meet the supplier and the government needs to meet halfway. And I also think we need to kind of get rid of this more dated idea of anything that's taking place in emerging technology being lowbrow and anything that happened 100 years ago by white men being like highbrow. I think, sure, there's a lot of great lowbrow content that I love, which is digital. I love memes and TikTok dance routines. They're all good. It's not going to be in the Met or in months in 20, 30 years' time. It's great content. But there's also so much great culture taking place on emerging technologies Just look at what's happening this year with NFTs. Look at what's happening this year with the metaverse. Like, these are ways we're using technology to make art accessible to all. So I can be living in Shanghai for I can have a tiny budget, but anybody, literally anybody, can learn how to make an NFT. There's pretty much no barrier to entry in terms of cost or expertise. Only people willing to watch the how-to YouTube, you know, and really get down to it. And then your work can be seen and it can be bought in Paris, in London. And the same with the metaverse. Like, one of the things it's going to do is it's going to turn kind of creators out of all of us. And the metaverse is going to increasingly blur the lines between our quote unquote real life and our virtual world life. And so if we can jump in and be an early adopter into this idea of digital art isn't like a second, a second-rate art, I think there's a lot of opportunities to really bring the wider populations in early, kind of get them involved.
I want to go a little wider and a little further back on this. The two organizations I have great respect for in Hong Kong. I think what they have done in the past with MED to really blur our borders so that you're a Hong Kong citizen, you're a Hong Kong brand, but the region is yours, the world is yours, and future city design. I think seeing the last years of how future city summits really bring global young active citizens together is incredible, and I think so I hope suddenly we're not confined to the Hong Kong Calgary Shanghai, even greater day, but we are citizens of the world with things like that, things that is blurring border. But the second part I want to think a little bit about is how do we make art and culture part of every day? I think one thing I learned by my many years in China is we have to help when we are sharing, when we are educating, we have to share, explain a little bit the context and why do we show something. So I think arts and culture is not for arts and culture's sake. If we cannot afford to have a lot of people coming to arts and culture, because first of all, they cannot afford to be here. Hong Kong is way too expensive to be in those fields in high. But arts and culture basically teach you about critical thinking, creative thinking, open opportunities, change building, change making. How do we make a bank more creative? How do we make a banking experience more interesting rather than counter a window standing in front of somebody? System thinking and the idea of hacking things that we've done 100 years. Right now, if this is not the time to change, post-COVID, middle of COVID, when are you going to change? This is the greatest opportunity to say, let's think. We have slowed down. Let's take the slow time to say, how can we live a better life, more interesting life, more conscientious life? So we hope arts and culture is going to make the technologists better. The all kind of various different fintech apps, much more user-friendly, much more human-centric, more fun to use. Because bottom line, don't think about your consumer. Think about your family. Think your kids would be happy with using it. Your grandfather, your father could optimize this product. Because if you think about the audience, you probably would not do so well. You would just give them something quite average. You will sell 1 million pieces. But think about more than you get people around you. That's when you want to improve it, you want to make it better. And
well said. Nice work.
So Hong Kong has always been positioning ourselves like as a super connector, like with all the different other countries and cities in the world. So for the creative industries, like how should we be interacting with other regions like GBA, like the other parts of mainland China, with other Asian countries, etc.? Do you have any thoughts on it?
I think actually in terms of policy, there's actually a lot of discussion going on already. Obviously, with the 45-year plan, and there's like Greater Bay Area policies. There's with the tax incentives, or like with special regions for with tax incentives, for example. I think people know that it's inevitable, and with Hong Kong's unique geographical positioning as well. So I think there's a lot of opportunities there, for example. I also think people will know when they're ready to try, but at the same time, I don't think like we need to force anyone to like, if they don't think they're ready for it, or if they don't think their solutions or their businesses could, is the right time for them to, to engage in whatever collaborations, that's fine as well. But it's just, the opportunities are there. There's a huge and different market to Hong Kong, just, across the border. So I think, we will do well to explore different sort of avenues for growth, but then also people can choose what they want to do.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's not my expertise, but I would say strength and diversity. I think Hong Kong has a couple of unique positions, and it should just focus on one area. It should take advantage of its position as a gateway to mainland China, as well as just like world city to use the branding. I think like strength and diversity, just pursue both, because both are unique to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And so don't go too far one way or the other.
Yeah.
Don't put your eggs in one basket. The opportunities absolutely.
I want to go back to the idea of borderless. I think in many ways, especially now the Zoom life that we're living, we become even more borderless. And I think
I didn't put that way. I fully didn't see mine.
And well, conferences are cheaper. You don't have to fly, drive, go to places to listen to amazing people and interact with them.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think I think the Hong Kong young people to be able to realize that also my personal experience, as we move cross culture, as we move cross discipline or into discipline, we become a better self. You will actually realize things that you cannot realize when you are staying in your own home and doing your own things every day. So the idea of not necessarily just going north, but look at the amount of countries we go to. I spent years in China studying urban rural bridge. How important is the rural people go to the city, learn things, and go back to the countryside. But for city people go to the countryside, go to elsewhere to apply their knowledge. That's when you really prove that, are you worth what you have studied? Are you worth what you've learned? You cannot prove your worth by being just in central, by being just in the marketplace. You have to go to places where you can really exercise, teach, give, and see if you really are able to touch, change, move people. That's when you really prove if you have learned your craft. So I think the idea of moving for young people, again, platforms like MAD, FCS, is allowing people to learn other culture, become actually better when you come back home, become more confident when you come back.
Becoming better selves. That's a really nice conclusion for our session. Not just our session, but also our morning part for today, the second day of the Future City Summit. So once again, thank you, Helen, Richard, and Lee for joining us here today in person. I particularly appreciate like this type of offline setting where we can really meet in person and interact. So that's really a great opportunity. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you in the afternoon.
Peggy.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.